Like, talk about a fucking coward. Hiding behind kids that he's sending into a doomed war effort to hide his own incompetence sounds about fitting for an administration led by a guy who himself avoided service because of elusive bone spurs.
Brian Tyler Cohen went straight for the jugular, and for good reason. In this clip, we're watching Pete Hegseth, Trump's embarrassingly unqualified Secretary of Defense, get absolutely dismantled by Democratic Senator John Ossoff during a congressional hearing. Ossoff pinned Hegseth down on his own past statements, claims that Iran's military had been destroyed and rendered combat ineffective, and Hegseth wouldn't answer. Instead, he deflected, got belligerent, and played the same old MAGA game of hiding behind the troops while sending them into a disastrous war with no clear strategy. Brian Tyler Cohen called it exactly what it is, cowardice. And the channel host, Chris on Culture, doubles down, pointing out that Hegseth's tantrum routine is just another performance for Dear Leader, while 70% of Americans know this war was a mistake from the start. Now we're going to break down why this moment matters. Why Hegseth's incompetence isn't an accident. It's by design, and what this says about an administration that has zero interest in winning, only in owning the libs.
We never expected they would stop having capabilities to shoot. The question is, at scale against an opponent like the United States of America, which went toe-to-toe with them and Iran couldn't.
You stated on March 8th, day 9 of the war, on 60 Minutes, you assured the American people of Iranian surrender. Does that remain your prediction?
Ultimately, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon to threaten the United States of America. That has been the objective, and it remains so.
So just to review, you will not answer whether your statement made on the 14th day of the war that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and made combat ineffective was a truthful statement to the American people as you sit here and ask for tens of billions more for the conflict.
Senator's time has
expired. A historic and effective military campaign against the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Won't answer the question.
Senator Peters is recognized.
That right there is why John Ossoff is one of the most effective communicators in the Democratic Party. And it puts on full display the ineffectiveness of someone like Pete Hegseth, who may love his little Fox News hits and his pre-screened interviews with the few right-wing journalists who are still allowed into the Department of Defense. But once he's actually confronted with a real question and a real follow-up, he relies not on the facts, but on his own belligerence. If Hegseth's testimony shows us anything, it's that the goalpost will always move with this administration. You'll remember that last summer, the strike on Iran was supposed to have been to obliterate Iran's nuclear capabilities. Then 6 months later, we apparently needed to go in again to strike what we'd already obliterated previously. Then the goal was regime change, wherein we went from Ayatollah Khomeini to Ayatollah Khomeini. Then it was to control the Strait of Hormuz, which, by the way, was already open before the war even began. On issue after issue, this administration has only moved the goalposts so that they can accomplish nothing and yet still, miraculously, give themselves credit for some non-existent success. The reality is that we didn't achieve some huge victory, because if we did, and I'm going to use some basic logic here, we wouldn't still be there. When Spain beat Argentina this weekend at the World Cup and got the trophy, they didn't keep playing. You know why? Because when you win, you stop. The fact that we are still in Iran suggests that maybe, just maybe, we didn't win this war any more than when George Bush declared mission accomplished in 2003, only for the U.S. to be at war for another decade. And in terms of Iran's military being rendered combat ineffective, if Pete Hegseth is telling the truth, why are we still fighting? If they were combat ineffective, wouldn't we be able to do anything we wanted? Wouldn't we have no problem taking over the Strait of Hormuz? No problem decimating their nuclear enrichment facilities, which we already promised happened? Look, I'm not a military expert. I don't claim to be a military expert, but I do have common sense. And if all of these things that Pete Hegseth is swearing up and down are happening, then why are we still there, still fighting, still spending money, and still unable to achieve our goals? The reality is that Pete Hegseth is lying through his teeth because he is unqualified to run this department, just as Trump is unprepared for this war. And Hegseth's only tactic here is to just throw temper tantrums and wave around jingoistic platitudes like this.
The destruction of missiles, and yet the missiles that we saw hit recent targets are actually somehow more lethal, more deadly, more maneuverable than what we have seen in the past. So they're obviously improving their munitions. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Reminding everybody it was open before the war. Prices were lower for everybody until the war, and it still remains closed. And of course, tragically, people, service members, our war fighters, who we care deeply about, are still dying. So what's different? Mr. Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth.
I think your characterization of this incredible effort as a failure is reckless. And I think it's irresponsible. And I think it smears the sacrifice of the troops that are out there making on behalf of the American people to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Shame on you and others who call this a quagmire and a failure, and then you want to turn around and say you support the warfighter. Either you do or you don't.
Is the nuclear material still there,
I can get you a ticket out to CENTCOM and talk to what those Americans are doing and how committed they are to this effort and how they want to ensure that Iran never threatens their families with a nuclear weapon. That's the kind of intensity that our warfighters have about making sure that Iran isn't capable of doing that.
Secretary Hegseth, if you listen to my comments, you would have heard me say how amazing our warfighters are.
I heard failure. The word heard. I heard exactly what you said.
I will tell you how I use the word failure, because I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them. And that's what's happening. We have political leadership. You don't have a strategy. You don't have a long-term plan to actually win this war. Win the war. The men and women are going to be able to do it, but they need to have leadership. When will you show leadership? When will you show leadership?
Why don't you show some leadership and stand up to your fellow Democrats who won't fund the troops, who stand and play partisan politics while you don't give us the money? You want to stand up here and talk about the troops? You won't show any political courage to actually fund our department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator.
Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion. You're asking for $1.5 trillion. It's not a question of money. It's a question of leadership and understanding what it takes to actually win.
Political cowardice of Democrats who won't fund the troops.
Yes, apparently when you confront a government that is sending American kids to die in a disastrous war with no plan, somehow that is an attack on the troops. Like, talk about a fucking coward. Hiding behind kids that he's sending into a doomed war effort to hide his own incompetence sounds about fitting for an administration led by a guy who himself avoided service because of elusive bone spurs. So good on John Ossoff for holding Pete Hegseth's feet to the fire, but no amount of gaslighting is going to change the reality on the ground, nor will it change what Americans can see with our own eyes, that this White House is only further bungling a war that they swore they would never get us into in the first place.
Let's be honest about what we just watched. Pete Hegseth didn't just fail that hearing. He embarrassed the entire concept of civilian oversight of the military. And Brian Tyler Cohen was absolutely right to call him out. But we need to go deeper than even Brian did, because this isn't just about one incompetent secretary. This is about a systemic rot that starts at the very top and trickles down into every single decision being made in this administration. First, let's talk about John Ossoff. What Ossoff did in that hearing was masterful, not because he was aggressive, but because he was prepared. He didn't lob rhetorical grenades. He laid out a simple, devastating timeline. He said, "You told us on day 9 that Iran would surrender. You told us on day 14 that their military was destroyed. Now you're asking for another $1.5 trillion. So which is it? Did you lie then, or are you lying now?" And Hegseth had nothing, absolutely nothing. He couldn't answer because the answer would either expose him as a liar or expose him as incompetent. And in this administration, they've decided it's safer to just be belligerent than to be honest. And that's the real strategy here. Belligerence is not a bug in the MAGA playbook. It's a feature. When you cannot defend your record, you attack the questioner. When you cannot explain your failures, you accuse the other side of not supporting the troops. When you cannot produce results, you wave a flag and scream about patriotism. It's the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook, and Pete Hegseth is absolutely terrible at it. But that doesn't matter because the base eats it up. They don't want competence. They want performance. They don't want results, they want red meat, and Hegseth gave them a full platter of it by wagging his finger and shouting about Trump derangement syndrome instead of answering a single substantive question. Let's pause on that phrase for a second. Trump derangement syndrome. That is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for this entire administration. Anytime they are confronted with reality, with facts, with failures, with dead service members, with closed straits, with enriched uranium that somehow wasn't destroyed, they just scream that anyone who asks questions is mentally ill. It's not a political argument. It's a psychological dismissal. It's designed to make the other side seem irrational so that the question itself is delegitimized. And the sad part is, it works on their base, but it does not work on anyone with a functioning brain and a moral compass. Now, let's talk about the war itself, because this is where Brian Tyler Cohen's logic was devastating and where we need to expand on it. Brian said, "When you win, you stop. Spain didn't keep playing after they won the World Cup." That is such a perfect, simple, undeniable point that it almost doesn't need elaboration, but we're going to elaborate anyway because the implications are enormous. The United States is still in Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Oil prices are still higher than they were before the war. American service members are still dying. Iranian nuclear enrichment is still happening. We know that because Hegseth admitted under questioning that nuclear material is still there. So what exactly did we accomplish? Because if Iran's military was destroyed and combat ineffective, as Hegseth swore on national television, then why are we still fighting? Why are we still spending $1.5 trillion? Why are we still losing troops? The only logical conclusion is that Hegseth lied. And he lied because he had to. Because the administration's entire narrative depends on a fantasy of victory that doesn't exist. They promised a quick, decisive strike to eliminate Iran's nuclear program. Instead, we got a grinding, endless quagmire. They promised regime change. Instead, the same Ayatollah is in power. They promised the strait would be open. Instead, it's closed. They promised lower prices. Instead, everything is more expensive. Every single promise has been broken. Every single goalpost has been moved. And yet they still demand absolute trust and unlimited funding. That brings us to the most disgusting part of this entire spectacle, the weaponization of the troops. Pete Hegseth and his ilk have perfected the art of using American service members as human shields. When you criticize the strategy, they say you're attacking the soldiers. When you question the funding, they say you're abandoning the troops. When you point out that the war is a failure, they say you're smearing their sacrifice. It is a cynical, morally bankrupt manipulation of the most sacred trust we have in this country, the trust that we will not send young Americans into harm's way without a clear mission, a sound plan, and an exit strategy. That is the bare minimum of responsible leadership, and this administration has provided none of it. And let's be absolutely clear about who Pete Hegseth is. This is a man who has never served in any elected office, never run a large organization, never managed a budget of even a fraction of what the Pentagon spends, and never demonstrated any expertise in foreign policy, military strategy, or international diplomacy. His only qualifications are that he hosted a show on Fox News and that he's willing to say whatever Donald Trump wants him to say. That's it. That's the resume. And he is now responsible for the lives of millions of service members and the security of the entire United States. It is not just embarrassing, it is dangerous. It is reckless. It is a dereliction of duty at the highest level. And he is not alone. This is an administration filled with people who are unqualified, unserious, and unaccountable. From the top down, Donald Trump has built a government of loyalists, not leaders, people whose main job is to protect him, not to serve the country. They don't care about results. They care about appearances. They don't care about winning. They care about claiming victory. They don't care about the troops. They care about using the troops as props. And the proof is in the outcome. We are stuck in a war we were told would be short. Spending money we were told would be minimal. Losing lives we were told would be unnecessary. And every time someone like John Ossoff dares to ask why, they are met with a tantrum and a lie. Now, here's the broader implication. This is what happens when you dismantle the norms of governance. When you hire people based on loyalty instead of competence, you get incompetence. When you prioritize performance over policy, you get failure. When you treat Congress as an enemy instead of a co-equal branch, you get gridlock and dysfunction. And when you treat the truth as optional, you lose the trust of the American people. That trust is not easily rebuilt. Once you've shown that you will lie about matters of life and death, you cannot simply ask for it back. Pete Hegseth can wag his finger and scream about funding all he wants, but the American people have eyes. They can see that the war is not going well. They can see that the promises were broken. The only demographic still fully on board is the MAGA base, and they make up about 30% of the electorate. That is a losing coalition. You cannot win a national election with 30% of the country, no matter how loud they are. And yet the administration continues to double down because they've painted themselves into a corner. They can't admit failure because failure would be a humiliation for Trump. They can't change course because changing course would be an admission they were wrong. So they just keep digging, keep lying, keep moving goalposts, and keep sending Americans into harm's way with no plan. The contrast with Democratic leadership could not be starker. John Ossoff did not grandstand. He asked pointed, informed, devastating questions. He had the receipts. He didn't need to shout or insult. He just let the facts speak. And the facts were damning. That is what real accountability looks like. That is what representation looks like. And that is what we have been sorely missing for the past several years. Now, let's talk about Brian Tyler Cohen's role in all of this. Brian did what the media should be doing every single day. He cut through the noise and told the truth. He didn't both sides this. He didn't pretend Hegseth had a point. He didn't say, well, both parties are to blame. No, he called it exactly what it was, a coward hiding behind kids to cover his own incompetence. That kind of moral clarity is rare in today's media environment, where too many outlets are terrified of being called biased. But the truth is not biased. The truth is the truth. Pete Hegseth is unqualified. Donald Trump is unfit. This war is a disaster, and any honest observer can see that. And Chris on Culture, the host of this channel, added another essential layer by reminding us that this is not just about Hegseth, it's about the entire MAGA movement. They are all belligerent, all smug, all performative. They don't go into hearings, work with Congress, they go into fight. They don't want solutions, they want content for their base. They don't care about the country. They care about the dopamine hit of owning the libs. That is not governance. That is reality television with real-world consequences. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with an administration that has no plan, no competence, and no shame. It leaves us with a Secretary of Defense who cannot answer a simple question about whether he lied to the American people. It leaves us with a president who avoided service himself and now sends other people's children into a war he can't manage. It leaves us with a Congress that has to fight for basic transparency and accountability. And it leaves us with a country that is poorer, less safe, and more divided because of it. But here is the note of hope. Moments like this, Hegseth's testimony, Ossoff's questioning, Brian Tyler Cohen's breakdown, they matter. They break through the noise. They remind people that not everyone is falling for the act. They show that there are still people in positions of power who will do their jobs and ask the hard questions. And they demonstrate that the MAGA strategy of belligerence and deflection is not working on anyone outside the cult. The more these hearings happen, the more the incompetence is exposed, the more the lies are laid bare, and the more the American people see the truth. Eventually, the pendulum will swing. It always does. But it will swing faster and harder if we keep holding these people accountable, if we keep amplifying the truth, if we keep refusing to normalize the abnormal. Pete Hegseth is not a normal Secretary of Defense. This war is not a normal war. And this administration is not a normal administration. We have to say that out loud, over and over, until everyone hears it. So, thank you to John Ossoff for asking the questions. Thank you to Brian Tyler Cohen for telling the truth. And thank you to everyone watching and sharing and refusing to look away. Because the only way out of this, the only way to honor the service members who have been sent into this mess, is to end the war, replace the leadership, and rebuild a government that actually works for the people. That starts with naming the failure. That starts with calling the cowards what they are. And that starts right now. This is not a drill. This is not a game. These are our families, our money, and our future on the line. And we cannot afford to lose. So we won't. We'll keep fighting, keep speaking, and keep holding them accountable until the day comes when this administration is nothing more than a cautionary tale and we have finally, truly reclaimed our country.